In this video, we're going to look at graphing decimals and some fractions on number lines, and then comparing which number or fraction is greater. So this is one of the early examples. It's pretty straightforward. It says graph 0 and 57 hundredths on a number line. So we have 0 and 50 hundredths on this end, 0 and 60 hundredths on this end. So I would suggest filling in the blanks, and that'll make it easier for you. So I've done my best to fill in all the missing digits in between 0 and 50 hundredths and 0 and 60 hundredths. So then it becomes very obvious that 0 and 57 hundredths is located right here. These next two examples look a little bit trickier, but aren't much harder at all. It says, find the value of G. Write your answer as decimal number. So know that G is somewhere between 0 and 1. So I notice this is broken into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parts. So this has been split into tenths. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in what each of the values of these little lines is. So you can see I filled in 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 0 and 3 tenths, 0 and 4 tenths, etc., etc. G falls at 0 and 7 tenths, and the 8 tenths, 9 tenths, and finally get to 1 whole. So all I need to do is write 0.7 or 0 and 7 tenths for my answer for G. Down here you might feel a little more confused because, like, Miss Cooper, this isn't, this is between 7 tenths and 8 tenths. This isn't like between 0 and 1. Well, I would suggest start by counting how many spaces there are. So, okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, well, there's still 10 spaces. Think about your place value chart. What comes between 7 tenths and 8 tenths? Now we're going to have 0 and 71 hundredths. Because remember, there's this invisible 0 in the hundredths right after that 7. So for this next one, I'm just going to write 0 and 71 hundredths, 0, 72 hundredths. So I've filled them in all the way from, so I've changed the 7 tenths to 70 hundredths. We talked about already how those are equivalent. There's the invisible 0, I've just written it in. That makes it easier for us to visualize, okay, if that's 70 and that's 80, we can make that 71 hundredths, 72 hundredths, etc., all the way up to 78 hundredths, 0 and 79 hundredths, 0 and 80 hundredths. And then it's easy to see that the missing A is 0 and 76 hundredths, 0 and 76 hundredths. Now they're asking us to do the same thing, but with a fraction. Graph 66 hundredths on the number line. Miss Cooper, this is a fraction and these are decimals. Take a breath and listen to how I just said it out loud. 66 hundredths. Hey, isn't that 0 and 66 hundredths? Yes. Noticing the connection between the language makes the connection between fractions and decimals so much easier to see. There is no hole here. There is essentially an imaginary 0 and 66 hundredths. Here we see there's no hole, 0 and 66 hundredths. So all you got to do is identify that part on the line. In these last two examples, they're getting us to recognize where the decimal numbers fall on the line and use the line to help us compare the decimals to figure out which is bigger. This is very similar to what we already did with equivalent fractions, so this shouldn't be too new and scary. So it says graph 0 and 7 tenths and 0 and 5 tenths on the number line. Then which number is closer to 0 and 0 tenths? So essentially, which number is smaller? Which one's closer to 0? I hope that based on your already existing understanding of decimals and fractions, you know that 7 tenths, 7 pieces of a pizza split into 10, is bigger than 5 tenths, 5 pieces of a pizza split into 10. So you're going to know that 5 tenths is already closer to 0. But we're going to show it visually. This first example really straightforward because the numbers are just written on there for us. So 5 tenths is right there. 7 tenths is right here. obviously the 5/10 is closer to 0. So you have this visual proof that 5/10 is the smaller number. Down here, the only tricky piece is we see it's asking us graph 0 and 6/10 and 0 and 51/100 on the number line. And you might want to say, but where's the 6/10? Remember, 6/10 is equivalent to 60/100. There's 6 in the tenths column, 0 in the hundredths, imaginary 0 here in the hundredths. So we have our 6/10 or 60/100 there, and our 51/100 here. Obviously, the smaller number is 51/100. Okay, that's it for this section. Good luck.